is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Laura, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the January 18th issue of the New York Times Style section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The Hip Priest, the Ex-Hedge Funder, and the $10 Million Townhouse. When a pastor learned his childhood home might undergo a glow-up, he saw his beloved Brooklyn further receding and took a different kind of pulpit. By Ginia Belafonte. Late one night in November, John Merz got some news about his childhood home that left him unsettled. A friend had texted a link to an article on a site devoted to New York real estate, reporting that the house, a mid-century building designed by Merz's parents, the celebrated architects Mary and Joseph Merz, was about to undergo a potentially dubious alteration. It could seem like a small thing. John Merz, 60, has had many chapters since he last lived in the house almost 40 years ago, as a college student, a cabinet maker, a graduate of Yale Divinity School at 38, and most recently as the rector of the Episcopal Church of the Ascension in Brooklyn. More than an ordinary fondness for this old house, he felt an abiding commitment to honor the imprint his late parents had left on the fringes of Brooklyn Heights. Brought up as Catholics, Mary and Joseph Merz made architecture their religion, the interplay of line, form, and context the prevailing theology. I knew enough about Louis Sullivan when I was 12 years old that I thought he was related to us, John joked recently. In the bedroom of the church rectory that night last fall, he clicked on the link and stared at a rendering of the proposed project. He was jolted towards distaste for what he described as a birthday cake, a square glass and steel addition, 14 feet wide and 9 feet high, that would sit in the middle of the roof. Given the location of the house on a corner, the structure would be all too visible from the street. In Merz's view, this would amount to a civic cost to accommodate a private want. At that point, the identity of the new owners was unknown to him. They had acquired the house through a limited liability corporation, a common tool of the rich to ensure anonymity in real estate transactions. Through Department of Buildings, filings, and the Brooklyn Grapevine, Merz learned that his childhood home now belonged to Andrew Beck and his partner, who had paid $10.6 million for it in 2024. Beck had been a managing director at the global investment firm D.E. Shaw before leaving Wall Street a decade ago. Change in Brooklyn Heights, the city's first historic district, is not easily negotiated. All but the most minor repairs to building facades are contingent on the approval of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. In recent years, though, the Commission has faced criticism for acquiescing to the sorts of projects it might have previously rejected, and Merz could not assume it would veto Beck's proposal. As he read about it, he decided he did not have the bandwidth to mount an opposition. After waking up at 5:30 the next morning, he changed his mind. He made calls and had the recipients of those calls make more calls. Architects and preservationists joined his cause. He enlisted his sister, Katie Merz, a public artist. She and her boyfriend posted signs around the Heights equipped with a QR code linking to a petition that asked the community to protect the house. The effort gained more than 775 signatures. This was how Beck learned about the hostility bubbling up around his proposal. "No one contacted us with concerns before going public with them," he told me. Merz, at the same time, wondered why Beck had not reached out to him. The previous owners of the townhouse, he said, had solicited feedback from the family about their renovation. Beck had hired the architect Basil Walter to design the glass structure and roof garden. Walter's firm, in turn, worked with a consultancy that advises on projects that go before the Landmarks Commission. Those involved with the plan said they considered it modest, unobtrusive. "We were shocked by the campaign against our expert's proposal," Beck said. When I asked Roberta Brandes-Gratz, a Landmarks Commission appointee under Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg, what she thought of the plan, she said she found it atrocious. Mary and Joseph Merz had built the house and two others like it in the early 1960s on Willow Place, an intimate street 1 block long distinguished by a row of Greek Revival houses from the 1830s on one end and Gothic revivals built later on the other. The Merz houses, in a style often described as brutalist, were praised in the design world from the outset, even among preservationists. It was their impression that new construction in the neighborhood ought to represent the best of contemporary architecture rather than replicate 19th century style and risk Disneyfication. In 1969, the American Institute of Architects honored the Merz houses for their sensitivity to location. Over the decades, professors from Harvard, Columbia, and Pratt Institute brought students to Willow Place to show them what the successful integration of a new stylistic language could look like within a traditional idiom. To John Merz, Beck's rooftop plan threatened his parents' careful dovetailing of past and present. "I felt the voice of my parents and all those students groaning, a big historical groaning of, 'Why?' he said." At a meeting in early November, a subcommittee of the local community board approved Beck's proposal if certain modifications were made. Some in the neighborhood were indifferent to all the debate, feeling that the houses were so ugly it didn't matter what went up above them. The Landmarks Commission could take these opinions into account at a hearing scheduled for November 25th. To comply with protocol, a full-size mock-up of the structure was up on the roof. Merz wanted a closer look. Theoretically, he could have gotten a glimpse from the roof next door, but the owner of that house lived in Sweden, and Merz hadn't spoken with him in 48 years. His sister Katie mentioned the problem to a cinematographer friend who offered the use of his DJI Mavic Air 2, a drone equipped with a camera. It flew above Willow Place for 15 minutes, delivering precise images. Whether this exercise was legal was unclear. On a frigid morning in early December, Merz, who lives with his wife and 2 children a few miles up the Brooklyn waterfront in Greenpoint, returned to his old neighborhood. We stood across the street from the 3 houses his parents had built on the contiguous lots they acquired in 1961 for $11,000. Merz took a laser pointer from his pocket and directed it at the roof of the 3rd house to reveal a glass rooftop addition built 20 years ago. He did not find this problematic because it was set far back enough that only a lip of about 12 inches was visible from the street. The Landmarks Commission had rejected an initial plan that would have made it more prominent. The visibility standard is taken very seriously, according to Brandes-Gratz, who served on the commission at the time. "There are lots of landmarks issues that are debatable," she said. "This is not one of them." The owner of that house was Martin Hale, who had bought it in 2013 with the appreciation of someone who had studied architectural history at Yale. Hale had inveighed against Beck's rooftop proposal even before Merz's campaign was underway. He had sent the Landmarks Commission a Google deck, 11 slides long, in which he argued that the structure would break the block's skyline. He also referred to an instance in 1978 when the commission had rejected a similar proposal for the second Merz house. Katie Merz's petition asked to uphold those precedents. as it circulated, the commission received 29 letters of opposition. One letter came from Kelvin Dickinson, the president of the Paul Rudolph Institute for Modern Architecture, who pointed out that the materials for the proposed addition, weathered steel with a galvanized steel guardrail, were incompatible with the building's wood and concrete. Andrew Dolkart, a professor of historic preservation at Columbia, was among several experts who volunteered to speak at the hearing. Each of those houses is very pure in its geometry, he told me. Putting something above them, well, why not just pop out a window? Here he was providing an example of the unthinkable. What struck him in particular was that the Merzes built the three houses at a time when there were no rules to constrain them. They are incredibly pioneering examples of contextual design before there was even a Landmarks Commission, he said. The couple could have built higher or done nearly anything, but they held back. To the Merzes, modernism was as much a call to social advancement as it was a means of aesthetic expression. And for that reason, John Merz saw the houses both as monuments to a restrained use of proportion and the progressive values his parents shared. The Merzes could take months, even years, to settle on the right end table, their son told me. But their unyielding approach to design was countered by an expansive view of community, and they brought people into their orbit eclectically as they settled into a neighborhood in transition. The area was rough by any measure. A drummer named Jimmy Rios got to know Joe Merz on a basketball court, one block over on Columbia Place, where he still lives. In the 1970s, gangs ran wild, Rios said, pulling antennas off car hoods for street fights. The Merzes responded to the disorder by planting trees. They also designed a playground for the end of the block. When two bear sculptures were placed in it, Rios and his friends named them Joe and Mary. One of the Merz houses was built for Leonard Garment, a jazz saxophonist who played with Billie Holiday and eventually became Richard Nixon's lawyer. An evening on the block might begin with cocktails at the Merzes and round out with dessert and more drinks at the Garment Place, where Daniel Patrick Moynihan was a frequent guest. Or it could take shape with Joe setting out a folding chair and a meal for Butchie White, who hung out across the street when he was not in prison. In the early 70s, White was sentenced for attempting to set fire to a townhouse behind the Merzes by throwing a lit refrigerator box into a window because a friend of his had been evicted. The owner of the house nearly lost to arson was another noted architect, Wids de la Cour, a friend of the Merzes. In those days, de la Cour told me, the city allowed owners to evict tenants with little difficulty, presuming you were moving into a building yourself. If Beck's rooftop addition was going to exact a civic cost, as Merz had phrased it, the vision imposed by the gentrifiers of the 1960s and 70s had levied their own. As well-intentioned as the Merzes' arboreal initiative had been, it annoyed kids on the block because it interfered with playing stickball, Rios told me. Still, John Merz could not shake the sense that what was happening now was a defamation of his parents' legacy. His parents understood their domestic space as a shared civic commodity. When they found out a dock worker who moonlit for them as a handyman was sleeping in his car, Katie Merz recalled, they invited him to live with them for a while and taught him how to read and write. In the front of their house, the Merzes enclosed their plantings with a ledge built at seat height to invite congregation. The glass rooftop structure would not simply be an addition to the house, Merz maintained, but a wholesale subtraction of long-standing and valued architectural good. As a cleric who founded a mobile food network, North Brooklyn Angels, to deliver meals to people in need, Merz was all too aware that a dispute concerning a modification to a one-percenter's townhouse might seem comically trivial. The dissonance, I get it, he said. I can see people reading about all of this and thinking, who cares? Still, to his mind, the proposed expansion spoke to something resonant, the erasure of a coherent architectural statement for no compelling public reason. Contests between cultural privilege and enormous financial advantage often resolve with moneyed interests winning. The narrative, turns in Brooklyn Heights, were not so easily predicted. In the Netflix version of the conflict, the owner of the Mers house would be a rapacious jerk. But Andrew Beck, known as Trey, they left finance to concentrate on philanthropy, working with organizations focused on child poverty. As one former colleague put it, he was the only guy on Wall Street I had nothing bad to say about. A few days before the scheduled Landmarks hearing, something unexpected happened. Beck pulled his application. Trey is a very sensitive person and never wanted to offend anyone, his architect Basil Walter said. What drove the antipathy seemed to extend, at least in part, beyond the matter of building height and perhaps even beyond a collective disgust over perceived entitlement, wealth disparity, and the self-siloing of the very rich. It suggested a weariness with the chaos and desecration that marks so much of our common experience, and a hope to gain some feeling of control from a winning campaign against a single luxury asset. Is that how Mers felt? When renovations face backlash in New York, homeowners often remount their efforts with revised plans. Mers said if that happened, he would involve himself again. After Beck backed down, he received a text from a friend that read, "Victory." Mers wasn't so sure. "I know enough about church history," he said, "to know that there is no such thing." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Style section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From a DJ set to church and back again. When the writer Lamorna Ash set out to explore young people's relationship to faith and religion, she found herself questioning her own. By Emma Goldberg. On a recent Sunday, the writer, Lamorna Ash, was observing an hour of silence in a Quaker meeting house in North London, a small brick building with a bright yellow door. Sitting among mostly elderly people with silver pixie cuts and sensible sweaters, Ms. Ash, 31, stuck out in orange Adidas sneakers and cargo pants. She closed her eyes. After the silent hour concluded, a Quaker elder approached and gently noted that she hadn't seen Miss Ash at the Quaker meetings in quite a while. She had been thinking of reaching out, she said, but then heard that Miss Ash had gone Anglican. "I moved between them," Miss Ash said, smiling wryly. "You're bi," the elder offered. "I'm bi," Miss Ash agreed. Last May, Miss Ash had published a book, Don't Forget We're Here Forever, about Christian conversations and a wave of curiosity towards faith that she had noticed among members of her generation and those younger. Toward the end of her time reporting and researching the book, Miss Ash, who was initially agnostic, started attending an Anglican church. Miss Ash often spends Saturday nights at sloppy house parties where DJs play trancy sets, and her Sunday mornings in church pews. That was not the case just 3 years ago, when Miss Ash, a reporter who considered herself firmly non-religious, decided to write about experimenting with different types of Christian prayers and rituals. The idea came to her when she was reporting a story about a comedy duo from her college days who decided to become Anglican priests. She looked around and over time noticed that so many people her age, 20-somethings, seemed newly open to exploring belief in God. "We are leagues away from the new atheist movement of the 1990s, Ms. Ash wrote in her book. noting that many people she interviewed had been shaped by the social rupture of the pandemic and the isolation brought on by screen addiction, which left them searching for a sense of wonder and community. Ms. Ash set out in late 2022 on a series of road trips in a pockmarked Toyota Corolla. She was on a quest to meet young people across Britain undergoing Christian conversations. She stayed at a training school for aspiring missionaries, at an ancient monastery on a Scottish island known as the Cradle of Christianity, and at a nunnery, in many of them meeting pious strangers bemused by Miss Ash, a youthful gay person asking sincere questions and scribbling in a notebook. A conversation can be an instant apocalypse or an incremental evolution, Ms. Ash wrote in Don't Forget We're Here Forever. It might come from nowhere, or outside yourself, or exist dormant inside you already as a latent tendency, waiting for its right moment to spring. Miss Ash's book, a little bit St. Augustine's Confessions, a little bit Jack Kerouac's On the Road, it is a follow-up to her 2020 debut, Dark, Salt, Clear, an account of her months living in a tiny Cornish fishing village and spending long stretches at sea with the fishermen on their trawlers. That book plunged readers into a faraway world, one that reeked of gutted cuttlefish and tasted like salty harbor air. The new one wrestles with questions laced through recent headlines about Christian nationalism, young people's loneliness, and political flux. Miss Ash investigates the broader and social trend of religious revival. Pew polling last year in America found that Christianity was no longer in decline, a shift driven by young people, but also, more personally, about the texture of self-change. She hurdles herself at experiences that have the potential to transform. If I kept putting myself in the way of Christianity, she writes, would I eventually be converted? At one point, while Miss Ash sat in a Pentecostal church in North London, the pastor declared that his prophetic gift was telling him that somebody in the packed room needed saving. Then he pointed a finger directly at Miss Ash and said, "You." Sometimes publishing a book conveniently coincides with reaching tidy conclusions. But Ms. Ash says her years of reporting on religious belief has, if anything, left her more ambivalent, both about whether she believes in God and about the simple question of where she should spend Sunday mornings. After the Quaker meeting that December morning, a church elder invited Miss Ash to join others who had stuck around for tea and homemade oat cookies. The low-key gathering felt wildly different than her reporting at an evangelical Bible study group, where the minister believed that gay sex was sinful. At the entryway to the Quaker house hung a sign that read, "Thou shalt decide for yourself." Throughout her reporting, Miss Ash tussled with the disquieting experience of straddling two worlds, attending an evangelical Bible study group one evening, and then another night making out with a couple at a party in Tottenham, spending Holy Week at a pilgrimage site meditating on the meaning of Easter, and then returning home to find friends celebrating spring and listening to music, their feet caked with dirt after playing barefoot volleyball. At that gathering, Miss Ash told one bemused friend, "Listen, in the car back, I had this weird thought that maybe I should become celibate." She is part pilgrim, but also part Martian, rocketing between planets that are dubious of one another, while insisting she came very much in peace. I went on a date, and she was like, "Yeah, my friends told me on a night out that I shouldn't go on a date with you because you're apparently all Christian now." Ms. Ash recalled, laughing and then adopting a pitying, pleading expression. I was like, "Oh no, you can still go on a date with me." After the Quaker meeting, Miss Ash drove home and greeted two of her roommates, who have gently teased her about these long, serious periods of religious wrestling. They grew accustomed to finding Miss Ash in pajamas in their kitchen, bent over a Christian history book and muttering to herself, "Why do there have to be so many denominations?" Their 3-bedroom home in the Gospel Oaks neighborhood is slightly too small for 4 people and crammed with books. Some are by authors Miss Ash considers models of her own writing, like Gary Indiana, Iris Murdoch, and John Jeremiah Sullivan, who in his book Pulphead writes exuberantly about his own cast-off evangelical upbringing and the unexpected gang of friends he meets at a Christian rock festival. Miss Ash's home has been a refuge through book writing years that have been not just intellectually perplexing, but also personally turbulent. Her mother began to display new signs of dementia as she wrote the book. Back when Miss Ash was reporting on the Cornish fishing village, she delighted in calling her mother to relate what she'd seen aboard the trawlers. This time she couldn't share her work as it came together. It was like writing with one crucial phantom audience member. Leaving home and walking toward the British Library, past low-slung brick shops and a winding canal, Miss Ash said she has known for years that dementia ran on her mother's side of the family. It is partially this knowledge that has left her so preoccupied with preserving experiences, remembering details. She is obsessed with keeping notebooks, capturing the way the moon looked behind a smoky cloud one night on Parliament Hill, or what it felt like to be on a glamorous reporting assignment in Paris in autumn when she learned her father had cancer. Drove down late last night under a big white moon. Somewhere you could see a blood moon, but not where I was, she wrote in one recent diary entry. Then in another, Mum came in from the garden crying to herself because she couldn't work out how to plant the irises, and she said tearfully, "So little, I used to have a brain." Along the route to the library, Miss Ash stopped in the bookstore where she used to volunteer, a charity shop with a little corner devoted to books on faith. Miss Ash, standing in front of the religion shelf, was amused to see that a book she had donated was still sitting there, a version of the Bible rewritten in a conversational, youthful tone. First off, nothing. No light, no time, no substance, no matter, the book starts out, summarizing Genesis. God starts it all up, and whap, stuff everywhere. What does the Saks bankruptcy mean for shoppers? Answers to this and other questions about the financial crisis in America's biggest luxury department store. By Vanessa Friedman and Jacob Bernstein. On Wednesday, Saks Global, the parent company of Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus, and Bergdorf Goodman, and the largest luxury department store group in America, filed for bankruptcy protection. Though it had been expected for a few months, the news still sent shockwaves through the fashion industry. Here is what it could mean for you. Is this the end of Saks and Neiman Marcus? No. Saks Global has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, not Chapter 7, which means it has too much debt to effectively run its business and is reorganizing under new owners, but it is not liquidating. This is not a Barney's situation, at least not yet. But it may mean the end of the Saks and Neiman Marcus near you. Retailers often use bankruptcy to get out of expensive leases, and the new owners of the group are expected to close a number of Saks and Neiman stores, as well as about half of the Saks off Fifth stores. That doesn't begin until about 30 days after the filing. And it may mean the end of some small designers that sell their clothes directly to department stores like Neiman and Saks and rely on it for the bulk of their revenue. Whose fault is this? First, people blamed Mark Metrick, the Saks chief executive, who resigned earlier this month for being too high-handed in his relationships with the vendors. Now they are blaming Richard Baker, the man behind the creation of Saks Global. See, when Saks acquired Neiman Marcus in late 2024, it took on lots of debt. Then management changed the payment terms for brands that supplied the stores, which meant that the brands started sending fewer products, which meant there was less to sell, which meant there was less money coming in. The biggest problem, however, may have been the fact that the whole retail business changed thanks to digital, social media, and direct-to-consumer shopping, and department stores didn't change with it. Add in global uncertainty, which makes people less excited about spending lots of money, and you have a very bad situation. Hang on, if they're closing stores, does that mean there will be giant going out of business sales? Yes. If anyone checked out the social media posts about the up to 85% off sale at Saks Off 5th on 57th Street in December, you'll have an idea of what you can expect if those stores close, though when that will happen is up in the air. Will I still be able to find my favorite designers at the Saks stores that are left? Again, it depends. The bankruptcy should not affect big luxury brands like Prada, Dior, and Gucci, which generally operate concessions in department stores, meaning that they rent their space from the store but manage and own their own products. In fact, in a recent report by the research firm Bernstein, Lucas Solka, a luxury analyst, said he expected that most luxury brands were aiming to reach the point where 95% of their sales were direct to consumer and only 5% were wholesale. But what about the smaller brands? For contemporary and small brands that own fewer or no stores and are thus dependent on department stores to act as their conduit to shoppers, this could be a disaster. According to Joseph Sarachek, a lawyer who has represented about 30 brands that are owed money by Saks, some are owed between $50,000 and $10 million. In bankruptcy, secured creditors are paid before unsecured ones, which essentially means that the most deep-pocketed investors in the company are remunerated before the poorest vendors. Those typically get pennies on the dollar, said Doug Hand, an attorney who represents brands like Todd Snyder. Sachin Aluwila, who founded the evening wear label Sachin and Baby with his wife Baby Aluwila, said the company hadn't been paid in months by either Saks or Neiman. "We're starting off the year on the back foot," he said. "It certainly creates a cash flow problem, which combined with the tariffs kind of creates a perfect storm for us." Why is no one speaking up about this? Because Saks, Neiman, and Bergdorf are likely going to exist in some form and will still be among the most storied luxury names. Smaller brands will need the exposure they offer. "There's nowhere else to sell," Mr. Sarachek said. The Aluwalis sounded frightened by the prospect of continuing to work with department stores or declining not to work with department stores because of how necessary they remain to their business. What does it mean for other department stores? Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom, the two other luxury national retailers left standing, are sensing an opportunity. Nordstrom has hired a number of Saks and Neiman employees, and Bloomingdale's has been wooing luxury brands like Chanel, Chloe, and Burberry and increasing their floor space. Perhaps the biggest winners will be smaller, multi-brand stores that essentially offer the opposite of algorithm-engineered shopping, like Maxfield in Los Angeles, Capital in Charlotte, North Carolina, Ikram in Chicago, and Dover Street Market in New York and Los Angeles. These are boutiques that have become destinations because they are very local, very curated, and reflect the environments around them. They are often run by owners who have personal relationships with their customers and are willing to take a risk on unknown labels, so shoppers never know quite what they are going to find from one visit to the next. Is there any upside? The good news for anyone who noticed the increasingly empty shelves at some Saks and Neiman stores is that they may soon be filled. Many brands stopped shipping new inventory to the stores back in October and November when it became increasingly clear that Saks Global might declare bankruptcy. In a healthy situation, new inventory flows into the store every week. Shoppers kept seeing a dwindling assortment of the same old stuff. The bankruptcy loan means Saks can start paying vendors again and they can start shipping. Okay, but is it only a matter of time before department stores fully disappear? An understandable question, given that once storied names like Barney's, Bonwit Teller, and Lord & Taylor no longer exist. People still really like to shop in actual stores, however. Mary Gay McKee, a former president of Saks, calls it an American pastime. Andrew Rosen, the founder of Theory and now an investor and advisor to brands like Alice and Olivia, Veronica Beard, and Rag & Bone, said that as far as he was concerned, nothing could replace the one-stop emporium where customers have access to a wide variety of brands under one roof and see, feel, and touch everything. He, at least, thinks rumors of the death of the department store are highly exaggerated. But in order to survive, the stores that are left will have to change. How will they change? The United States seems to be heading toward a European model, wherein department stores are more like tourist attractions in big urban centers than chains of transaction centers. For examples, see Harrods and Selfridges in London, Bon Marché and Printemps in Paris, and Randstad in Milan. The idea is shopping as entertainment, with art exhibitions, limited edition collaborations, and hospitality. Think of them as shopping Disneylands, contained in landmark buildings where visitors can experience the elite consumption habits of another time. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Style section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Stars seize chance to speak out at night honoring Leonardo DiCaprio. Actors and filmmakers were celebrated at the annual National Board of Review Gala, where winners called attention to protests in Minneapolis and the violent crackdown in Iran. By Sarah Barr. On a red carpet inside Cipriani 42nd Street in Midtown Manhattan on Tuesday night, a cadre of celebrities including Leonardo DiCaprio, Emily Blunt, Rose Byrne, and Benicio del Toro posed for cameras. Among them was Chase Infinity, 25, who stars as the spunky daughter of a washed-up revolutionary played by Mr. DiCaprio in the action thriller One Battle After Another. She was having a surreal awards season, she said, and had just attended the Golden Globes, where she was nominated for Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy. But for Miss Infinity, who was receiving the National Board of Review's Breakthrough Performance Prize at its annual Film Awards Gala, something else was on her mind. "I love heated rivalry," she said, her eyes lighting up as she spoke about the steamy series on HBO Max about a pair of professional hockey players, which has become a breakout hit since it began streaming in November. The stars, Connor Story and Hudson Williams, presented the Globes on Sunday night. There's been so many moments in that show where I've literally stood up jumping because I was so excited. But don't spoil the ending. I haven't got to the cottage yet, she added, referring to the setting of the final episode of the show. Ms. Infinity was among several hundred actors, directors, and producers who attended the event, for which the winners are announced in advance. Mr. DiCaprio, Ms. Byrne, and Ryan Coogler were honorees, and Martin Scorsese, Michael B. Jordan, Paul Rudd, and Maggie Gyllenhaal served as presenters. The National Board of Review, a group of film enthusiasts, filmmakers, and academics, honored the best films and performances of the last year. A traditionally irreverent gathering that is not televised, The gala has become an annual East Coast stop for stars on the Oscar campaign trail. This year's big winner was One Battle After Another, the director Paul Thomas Anderson's neo-Western epic. It continued its streak of top finishes at ceremonies like the Golden Globes, the Gotham Awards, and the New York Film Critics Circle. On Tuesday night, it picked up the awards for Best Film, Director, Mr. Anderson, Actor, Mr. DiCaprio, Supporting Actor, Mr. Del Toro, and Breakthrough Performance, Ms. Infinity. Other winners included the Iranian filmmaker Jafar Panahi's prison drama It Was Just an Accident, which he filmed in secret, Best International Film. Mr. Coogler's vampire thriller, Sinners, Best Original Screenplay and Outstanding Achievement in Cinematography, and Ms. Byrne for her role in the motherhood drama If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, Best Actress. The evening began with a dinner of salmon, asparagus, and roasted potatoes, served at tables topped with a variety of swag from the films being honored. The Morning Joe co-anchor, Willie Geist, kicked off the awards portion of the evening, which included lengthy speeches, often exceeding the 10-minute mark, that were sprinkled with profanity. Unlike the Globes, which were a generally unpolitical affair, several honorees drew attention to current events in their acceptance speeches. Mr. Coogler, who was honored for his screenplay for Sinners, made reference to the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis this month. He and Mr. Jordan, the film's star, had been honored by the board in 2014 for the first movie they made together, Fruitvale Station, which is based on the true story of a black man shot by a white police officer on a subway platform in Oakland, California in 2009. I was young and naive, and I thought the movie was going to change the world and make it so you didn't see people executed by civil service on camera anymore, Mr. Coogler said. I was proven wrong, again and again, and it's tough to be here and not think about Minnesota. I can't be here and not think about Renee, he added. Mr. Panahi, who had been imprisoned and barred from filmmaking in Iran, his home country, used his acceptance speech to draw attention to the violent crackdown on protesters challenging the government in Iran. The Islamic Republic has caused a bloodbath to delay its collapse, Mr. Panahi said through the interpreter. Bodies are piling up on bodies, and those who have survived are searching for signs of their loved ones through mountains of corpses. This is no longer a metaphor. This is not a story. This is not a film. This is a reality ridden with bullets day after day. In accepting this award, I consider it my duty to call on artists and members of the global film community to speak out and not remain silent, he continued. Use any voice and any platform you have. Call your governments to confront this human catastrophe rather than turn a blind eye. Do not let blood dry in the darkness of amnesia. Social cues. Can I tell my sister that our friends don't want to travel with her? A reader feels conflicted about taking a trip with friends who specifically asked that a travel challenged sister not come along for the ride. By Philip Gallanes. My sister and I have an unusually close relationship. A few years ago, we traveled with a small group of mutual friends. Now those same friends have invited me on another trip, but they told me that my sister is not invited. She can be extremely challenging when she travels. Think ugly American causing a scene. She has therapy to address the issues, but it is still difficult to be around her when she is away from home. I want to travel with these friends, but should I decline the invitation out of respect for my sister? Tell them that she and I are a package deal? Or should I explain to my sister that I want to go on this trip without her? Sister. It's hard to imagine anyone faulting a close relationship between sisters, until it keeps one or the other of you from leading a fulfilling adult life. I don't want to read too deeply into your brief letter, but your unusually close relationship with your sister seems to have persuaded you that there is something wrong in traveling without her. There is not. I understand that your sister's prior experience traveling with the group makes things trickier, but it sounds as if even she would acknowledge that the previous trip was not successful. Travel requires flexibility that can be difficult for some people. There are certainly worse faults, but it isn't reasonable to expect friends to invite a difficult traveler to join them again, or for you to issue ultimatums about including her. And I think you can explain this compassionately to your sister, even if she is stung by the exclusion. Remind her of the wonderful qualities that more than make up for her difficulties with travel. You can even offer to practice being out of control on the road together for a few days, if traveling is important to her. Still, tell her that you are joining the group for your fulfillment and that you hope she understands. Return to sender, please. We sold our home recently. The buyers asked to move in a week sooner than planned, so I asked a friend if we could stay in her vacant house that week. She agreed, and I sent her a Venmo payment of $1,000 as a token of our thanks. Later, I saw that I had mistakenly sent the payment to a former friend who moved away 11 years ago. I contacted her and she was pleasant. She agreed to return my money as soon as she figured out how to do it. I sent her a charge request and texted her the next day. Nothing. So I texted again and she replied, "Stop texting me." Then I sent her a video and a voicemail message so she wouldn't think it was a scam. Still nothing. Venmo says that they can't do anything to help because I sent the money to a verified contact. Help! Out $1,000. You made an honest mistake and I agree that it should be rectified. But in most cases, sending electronic payments to known contacts is like handing cash to the people on the street. If we later want them to return the money, the best we can do is ask them, which you have done. New technologies often bring new problems. But there is no crime here, and I am setting aside the notion of civil suit for just enrichment because that seems extreme. I also wonder if your friend may feel overwhelmed by the volume of communication from you if you haven't been in touch for 11 years. She didn't ask you to send her money, and your error doesn't make this her emergency. I would lie low for a couple of weeks and then send a final request, appealing to her better angels. Hopefully, she will comply. For help with your awkward situation, send a question to socialq@newyorktimes.com. Modern love. Please cheat on me. Why did I keep fantasizing about catching my faithful boyfriend in bed with another woman? By Rachel Sontang. On a humid August afternoon, I stood in a silver bridesmaid dress and watched a friend recite her wedding vows. I had left my then boyfriend behind in San Francisco. At 24, I was falling in love with him, enjoying our slow progression, but I wasn't ready to take him to a wedding. As the groom recited his vows, tender and clever, I drifted into fantasy. A fantasy in which my boyfriend was in bed with another woman. Heat shot through my neck. I didn't imagine the face of this other woman, and I didn't imagine them having sex. I only imagined my rage at the sight of his unmade bed. I don't know how I knew, but I knew in my fantasy I would be able to smell betrayal. The groom kissed the bride. People clapped, and so did I, but in my mind I was 2,500 miles away, standing angrily in the bedroom of the boyfriend who never actually cheated. I spent the entire wedding cultivating a fantasy I would harbor for decades. The details never change, just the man. I learned that I have been cheated on. I proceed to rage in a wild manner that can only live in my imagination because I would never rage like that in real life. I shatter ceramic plates, rip his shirts off hangers, and toss them out the window. The boyfriend owns a lot of shoes and ties, and they pile up like mountains in the street. "Get out!" I yell. The boyfriend is wildly apologetic. He is going to fight for me. That's what he yells as I push him out the door before I melt onto the floor and sob. To clarify, I only drummed this up with men I loved. almost always 6 months into a relationship when our connection was becoming deep and real, when I felt safe and seen. It was intrusive, interrupting tender moments like cooking dinner together. Somehow, thinking about being cheated on made me feel closer to whichever man I was with. Did it turn me on? I couldn't tell. I had the question at a confused distance. Thinking about it filled me with shame and often exhilaration. I know many people's lives have been devastated by cheating. I never told anyone. Eddie and I met in our 40s. From his online profile, I learned he was newly divorced and adored his daughters. It was unwise to get involved with someone fresh out of a marriage, but his freshness attracted me. He seemed passionate and vulnerable, traits that often get lost after years of serial dating. None of him was lost on me. We had riotous laughing attacks and raw, meaningful conversations. We loved music and spent days playing the songs that had saved our lives through his worst years of marriage, through my childhood hell. When I was a child, my father fixated on me in profoundly harmful ways. While he stopped short of sexually abusing me, he smothered me with inappropriate attention. More damaging than his attraction was how he blamed me for it, as did my mother. Their anger and resentment wreaked havoc on our family, for which I blame myself. When I was 15, my school guidance counselor got wind of my situation, which started a process that briefly landed me in foster care. At 19, I left home and never returned. In my 20s, I fell in love with good men who introduced me to their families and wanted a future together. I wanted to be loved so badly, but the only love I'd known had been suffocating and obsessive. I left those relationships at the slightest hint of discomfort, unable to tolerate the intense emotions that came with love. Convinced I needed no one, I bulldozed through countries, jobs, and relationships, uprooting myself constantly. I needed therapy. But then, understanding the severity of my father's mistreatment would have required learning how to sit with immense pain. Instead, I kept reenacting the relief I had found in leaving home by leaving good relationships. Eddie had spent the last 20 years creating his family. I'd spent those decades running from mine. He expressed his romantic desires and aspired to make them a reality. I had luxuriated in a certain deprivation of desire that kept everything I'd ever wanted at arm's length. On our third date, he got excited at the thought of meeting his children. I threw up at the suggestion and blamed it on the duck we'd had for dinner. Even after years of therapy and becoming a therapist myself, I hadn't been able to dismantle the unconscious belief I was at fault for what had happened in my family. What if the girls get attached to me, I said, and then we break up? I was standing in his walk-in pantry studying their snack preferences. Eddie turned me toward him and put his arms around my neck, a slight smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "Is that what you're afraid of?" he asked. "I don't want to hurt them." "Maybe you don't want to get hurt," he said. He was right about that. I was afraid. Those old childhood beliefs had created a hypervigilance. I wanted to protect everyone from myself and the future hurt I might cause. This was especially true of men, and God forbid I ruin another family. As I started talking about my fears, things shifted between us. I opened up more with Eddie than I had with any man. Soon I got excited to meet his girls, to hang my sweaters in his closet. Then one night, while we were having sex, he called me by another woman's name, with a sleepy reminiscence in his voice that made me think it was more than just a slip. Later, on the laptop he had lent me while mine was in the shop, I saw text messages that revealed he had been cheating on me. A fantasy realized is no longer a fantasy. The intense hurt carved me up, but I held it together. I confronted Eddie, presented evidence, expressed disappointment, and requested space. Calm, rational, controlled. In the privacy of my home, though, I exploded. I cried into my pillow and raged against it, beating out the feathers. I took a hammer to a framed photo of his. I wanted to physically extricate the pain from my body. I was blown away by the ferociousness of my feelings, so different from the quiet, calcified, historic hurt I had buried. Eddie texted every day, reaffirming his devotion to our relationship. Then he called. "I might leave you," I said. "It's not what I want," he said, "but I get it." "You know it's not my fault, right?" "Of course it's not your fault," he said. "Say it again," I said. "Tell me again it's not my fault." "It's not your fault, Rach. What I did was not your fault." How to describe what I felt hearing those words? An ecstatic, mesmerizing, dizzying relief. Words I would never hear from my father or mother. Words I had waited all my life to hear. During our time apart, I revamped my fantasy. Real-life relics replaced generic cliches. I imagined chucking Eddie's prized football memorabilia out the window, smashing his ceramic plates, giving him the finger. Then I let myself unravel, hiccuping and hyperventilating like a little kid until he scoops me in his arms and I cry my eyes out for everything I've never let myself cry about. Cheating is one of those universally agreed upon crimes of the heart, a clear-cut assignment of wrong and right. Maybe I needed something that clear-cut to feel right about having been wronged by Eddie, by my father. Eddie wasn't my father, and that's what made it safe to sit with the pain and anger. He could give me things my father couldn't. Acknowledgement, apology, amends, repair. Our birthdays were a day apart, and Eddie had rented a cabin, a trip we had planned a while back. I agreed not to cancel. We would go to that cabin and see what happened. In the car, unready to talk, I placed my hand on his arm and turned up the music. It was late when we arrived. My anger had softened, and I was overcome by sadness. I wanted to absorb it all, everything I had repressed and run from, feelings I had only felt entitled to in my cheating fantasy. A fantasy, it turned out, that had little to do with cheating. Like a long-term storage unit, it merely had provided a safe and reliable place to leave these parts of myself until I was ready to unearth and then reclaim them. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 18th issue of the New York Times Style section. Your reader has been Laura. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the USA Today. Following that at 2 o'clock is episode number 15 of Mark Twain by Ron Chernow. Stay with us for these readings and more. You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, broadcasting daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, and books to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. Radio Readings broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Radio Reading's website is nfradioreading.org. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call us at 716-821-5555.
The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service